The security guard who could save lives better than doctors. What happened next changed everything. Most people didn't notice the night security guard at Metropolitan General Hospital. Not out of malice, just habit. He walked the halls after visiting hours, checking doors, monitoring cameras, pushing through double doors with his keycard. He blended into the background like the hum of ventilators and the distant beeping of monitors. It was Tuesday night in downtown Chicago. The hospital's emergency department buzzed with controlled chaos. Gurneys rolled across polished linoleum floors. Nurses rushed between rooms clutching charts and medication bags. Residents stumbled through rotations with bloodshot eyes. Attending physicians moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd seen everything twice. The air smelled like antiseptic and coffee, with an undertone of something heavier that only hospitals carry. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief of medicine, was halfway through her evening rounds when she heard it. A voice, but not just any voice. Calm, analytical, and cutting through medical jargon with the precision of someone who'd spent years in trauma bays and operating rooms. She'd been working at Metropolitan General for 8 years. She'd heard every possible combination of medical terminology from interns trying to sound smart to seasoned specialists discussing complex cases. But this voice was different. "Excuse me, ma'am," the voice said, polite but confident. "I don't mean to interrupt, but that patient in bed 7. Has anyone checked for hereditary angioedema?" She stopped cold in the middle of the hallway. Her stethoscope swayed against her white coat. Not because of the question itself, but because of who was asking it. She turned slowly to see a man in a Navy security uniform. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, salt and pepper hair cut short and professional. He stood near the nurse's station with a clipboard in one hand and a security radio clipped to his belt. His posture was straight, alert. The stance of someone accustomed to watching and waiting. She'd seen him before, making quiet rounds through the corridors at all hours. Checking doors, nodding politely to staff, always present but never intrusive. He moved through the hospital like he belonged there, but in that invisible way that security guards and janitors do. Essential but unnoticed. She didn't even know his name, had never thought to ask. He was just part of the building's ecosystem, like the elevators or the fire alarms. But here he was, casually dropping a rare diagnosis. 3 residents, 2 attendings, and a consulting specialist had been wrestling with this case for the past 4 hours. Hereditary angioedema. A condition so uncommon that most doctors went their entire careers without seeing a case. Dr. Chen narrowed her eyes, her mind racing. "What did you say?" He looked slightly uncomfortable, as if he'd overstepped some invisible boundary. The swelling pattern in her face and throat, the family history she mentioned when she first came in. The way the steroids and antihistamines aren't helping. "It looks like HAE to me. Type 1, probably. Might want to try C1 esterase inhibitor concentrate, or at least fresh frozen plasma if you don't have the concentrate on hand." The words hung in the air between them. Dr. Chen felt her pulse quicken. Not from stress but from the electric recognition that comes when someone says exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. She'd been staring at that patient's chart for 20 minutes. Reviewing lab results and consulting notes, feeling that familiar frustration of knowing something was wrong but not being able to put her finger on it. She stared at him for a long moment, taking in the calm confidence in his eyes, the way he held himself like someone who'd made life-or-death decisions before. Then she walked quickly to bed 7, her heels clicking against the floor with new purpose. The patient was a 19-year-old college student named Amanda. Admitted 6 hours earlier with facial swelling and difficulty swallowing. Her lips were puffy, her eyes nearly swollen shut. Despite aggressive treatment with steroids and epinephrine, she was getting worse. The team had been preparing to intubate her airway, thinking it was a severe allergic reaction to something unknown. Dr. Chen pulled up the electronic chart on the bedside computer. She scrolled through the admission notes more carefully this time. There it was, buried in the social history. Patient reports that her aunt had similar episodes of swelling, usually triggered by stress. Patient's mother mentioned that her grandmother had died during a similar episode when she was young, but the family was never sure why. Family history. The one thing that separated hereditary angioedema from every other cause of facial swelling. Dr. Chen felt her stomach tighten with the realization of how close they'd come to missing it entirely. 15 minutes later, after reviewing the labs again and ordering additional blood work, she had the answer. Complement levels were low, exactly what you'd see in hereditary angioedema. She ordered C1 esterase inhibitor concentrate from the pharmacy. A medication so rarely used that it had to be specially prepared. Within an hour, Amanda was sitting up in bed. The swelling was visibly reduced, breathing normally for the first time all night. By morning, she looked like a completely different person. Dr. Chen stood in the doorway watching Amanda laugh with her parents. She felt a mixture of relief and something else. Curiosity. She'd been practicing medicine for 15 years, had seen thousands of cases, prided herself on her diagnostic skills. Yet a security guard had spotted something in 30 seconds that she and her entire team had missed for hours. She found him in the security office on the ground floor. A small windowless room filled with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the hospital. He was reviewing footage, methodically checking each screen, making notes on his clipboard. The room smelled like coffee and had the quiet hum of electronics. "Excuse me," she said, knocking on the open door. He looked up, slightly startled. "Dr. Chen. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. That patient you asked about. You were right. Hereditary angioedema. She's doing well." He nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Good. I'm glad." "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus Williams, ma'am." "Mr. Williams, are you free for a few minutes?" His eyebrow raised slightly. "Now?" "Yes. I'd like to talk to you in my office." She noticed the look of hesitation that crossed his face. Not fear exactly, but that built-in reflex people have when they're used to staying in their designated role. When they're accustomed to being helpful but invisible. He slowly stood up, adjusting his uniform shirt. "All right?" They rode the elevator to the administrative floor in relative silence. The executive level smelled different. Leather and wood polish instead of antiseptic. Her office overlooked the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the Chicago skyline twinkling in the distance. Medical degrees and awards covered one wall, along with photos from conferences and a picture of her with the hospital's board of directors. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Marcus sat carefully, hands folded in his lap. His eyes moved slowly across her credentials and achievements. He wasn't intimidated, just observant. Taking in the details with the same methodical attention she'd seen him apply to the security monitors. "So, Marcus," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I'm going to be honest. I didn't expect to have this conversation tonight. But you just diagnosed something in 30 seconds that my entire team missed for 4 hours. I need to understand. How does a security guard know about hereditary angioedema?" For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes moved to the window, then back to her face. As if he was weighing how much truth to share. "You got time for the real story?" he asked finally. "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." He sighed deeply. The sound of someone who'd been carrying weight for a long time. "All right then." He rubbed his hands together as if warming up words that had been kept cold for years. "I was a doctor once. Emergency medicine, trauma surgery. Graduated top of my class at Howard University. Did my residency at Emory in Atlanta, fellowship in critical care medicine at Johns Hopkins. I was good at it. Really good. Published research, spoke at conferences, had a private practice on the side. I was living the dream, you know?" He paused, his voice taking on a different quality. Softer but steadier. "Then my son got sick. Michael. He was 8 years old, bright kid, loved baseball and dinosaurs. Started getting bruises that wouldn't heal, getting tired all the time. We took him to pediatricians, ran tests, got second opinions. When they finally diagnosed acute lymphoblastic leukemia, my world stopped." Dr. Chen watched him, not blinking. Feeling the weight of what was coming. "My wife Sarah and I, we did everything. Experimental treatments, clinical trials in Houston and Boston. We flew to Germany for a therapy that wasn't approved here yet. I liquidated my retirement account, took out loans against the practice, mortgaged our house twice. We spent 3 years fighting, hoping, praying. Michael was so brave through all of it. Braver than I ever was." His voice caught slightly, but he continued. "He died on a Tuesday morning in October. The nurses had to physically pull me away from his bed. I couldn't understand how someone so small and perfect could just stop." The office fell silent except for the distant hum of the hospital below them. After that, everything fell apart. Sarah couldn't handle being around medicine anymore. Couldn't handle being around me because I reminded her of everything we'd lost. She moved back to California to live with her sister. We tried counseling, tried separation, but grief had changed us into different people. The divorce was final about 6 months after Michael died. He looked directly at Dr. Chen now, his eyes clear and steady. "I had what you'd call a breakdown. Stopped sleeping, stopped eating regularly, made some poor decisions. There was a malpractice suit during that time. Patient who came in with chest pain that I misread as anxiety instead of recognizing an atypical MI presentation. Wasn't entirely my fault. The EKG was borderline and she was young with no risk factors. But I was so distracted by my own grief that I didn't dig deeper. She survived, but barely. I couldn't afford proper legal representation because all my money was gone from Michael's treatments. Lost the case, lost my malpractice insurance, lost my medical license. The medical board said I was practicing while impaired by grief. They weren't wrong. Dr. Chen felt her chest tighten with the weight of his story. That was 8 years ago, Marcus continued. I've been working security jobs ever since. Night shifts mostly, because it lets me avoid questions about my background. This job at Metropolitan General is the longest I've stayed anywhere. Good benefits, quiet work, and... He paused, looking around her office. Being around medicine again, even from the outside, it feels like coming home. I know that sounds strange. It doesn't sound strange at all, Dr. Chen said quietly. But I never stopped learning, he added. I read medical journals online, follow new research, study case reports. It's all I know how to do. Medicine is like a language. Once you speak it fluently, you can't just forget. I see patients in the hallways, overhear presentations during rounds, and my brain automatically starts putting pieces together. He gave a small, sad smile. Sometimes I catch things that get missed, like tonight. But I can't do anything about it officially. So I just mention it to whoever will listen and hope they take it seriously. You ever think about getting back into medicine? Dr. Chen asked. He gave a small shrug. Every day. But it's hard to dream about tomorrow when yesterday follows you everywhere you go. Plus, I'm 51 years old. Even if I could get my license back, most hospitals want young doctors with clean records, not guys with complicated histories. Dr. Chen sat back in her chair. She felt the full weight of what she'd just heard. Marcus Williams wasn't just a security guard with unusual knowledge. He was a physician in exile, a doctor without a license carrying years of expertise and grief in equal measure. Marcus, she said slowly, what you just told me, that's not the story of a failed doctor. That's the story of a father who loved his son and a physician who got lost in grief. Those are very different things. He looked at her with something approaching surprise. You saved a life tonight, she continued. Maybe that doesn't give you back everything you lost, but it matters. It counts. For the first time since he'd started talking, Marcus's composure cracked slightly. His eyes glistened, but he blinked the tears away before they could fall. I appreciate that, he said quietly. More than you know. Dr. Chen reached for her notepad and began writing. What are you writing? He asked, his voice curious but guarded. She looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Ideas. Big ones. The conversation stuck with her all week. During budget meetings with hospital administrators, department reviews with division chiefs, and late-night calls about staffing issues. Dr. Sarah Chen's mind kept circling back to that night. To Marcus Williams and the quiet way he'd solved a case that had stumped her entire team. She found herself watching him during his rounds. Noting how he moved through the hospital with a different kind of awareness than typical security guards. He didn't just check doors and monitor cameras. He listened to conversations, observed patient interactions, picked up on the subtle rhythms of hospital life that most people missed. Friday evening, she made a decision. She found him in the parking garage, checking the perimeter alarms and making sure the emergency exits were properly secured. The underground garage was dimly lit, filled with the echoes of car engines and footsteps. Marcus, she called out, her voice carrying across the concrete space. He turned, surprised to see her in the garage. Dr. Chen. Working late? Always, she said with a tired smile. Listen, I have a favor to ask. He set down his clipboard. What kind of favor? There's a case upstairs that's got everyone stumped. Young girl, 15 years old. Been here for 3 days with multiple symptoms that don't fit any clear pattern. 3 specialists have seen her, we've run every test imaginable. We're no closer to a diagnosis than when she arrived. She paused. Would you be willing to take a look? He hesitated. His training and 8 years of staying invisible warred with his instinct to help. Dr. Chen, I'm not licensed to dash. I'm not asking you to treat her or write orders, she interrupted. Just to look. Unofficially. Fresh eyes, different perspective. Sometimes the answer is right in front of us and we just can't see it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. I can do that. 30 minutes later, they stood outside the pediatric ICU looking through the glass at bed 12. The patient was Emma Rodriguez, a 15-year-old high school sophomore. She'd been admitted with fever, joint pain, and a rash that came and went without pattern. Her parents sat beside her bed, looking exhausted and worried. Dr. Chen handed Marcus the chart, thick with 3 days of notes, lab results, and consultation reports. He read through it methodically, occasionally asking questions about timeline and symptoms. His eyes moved between the paperwork and the patient herself. Has anyone checked her eyes? He asked after 20 minutes of review. What do you mean? Her eyes. Has an ophthalmologist examined her? Dr. Chen looked confused. No, why would they? Her chief complaints are fever and joint pain. Marcus pointed to a note buried in the nursing documentation. Day 2, nurse documented that patient complained her vision was fuzzy but attributed it to fatigue. Day 3, different nurse noted patient seemed to have trouble tracking objects but didn't follow up. He looked through the glass again, watching Emma interact with her parents. Look at how she's positioning her head when her mother talks to her. She's compensating for visual field cuts. Dr. Chen felt her pulse quicken. You think she has? Temporal arteritis. Giant cell arteritis. Juvenile presentation is rare but not unheard of. The fever, the joint pain, the transient rash. They're all consistent. But if I'm right, her vision is already being affected. Which means her temporal arteries are inflamed. She's 15 years old, Dr. Chen said automatically. Temporal arteritis almost never occurs in dash. Almost never isn't never, Marcus interrupted gently. And if I'm right and we don't treat her soon, she could lose her sight permanently. Dr. Chen stared at him, then at Emma through the glass. Giant cell arteritis in a teenager would be a case study worthy of medical journals. But the consequences of missing it were catastrophic. What would you do? She asked. Temporal artery biopsy, stat. High-dose steroids immediately, don't wait for the biopsy results. ESR and CRP are already elevated according to these labs, which supports the diagnosis. 30 minutes later, Dr. Chen was on the phone with the ophthalmology resident, explaining why she needed an emergency temporal artery biopsy on a 15-year-old patient. 2 hours after that, the pathology report confirmed Marcus's diagnosis. Giant cell arteritis, juvenile onset. Emma Rodriguez started high-dose prednisone that night. Within 24 hours, her fever was gone, her joint pain was manageable. Most importantly, her vision had stabilized. The ophthalmologist confirmed that they'd caught it just in time. Another few days and the arterial inflammation would have caused permanent blindness. Dr. Chen found Marcus the next morning in the cafeteria. He was eating breakfast alone at a corner table. She sat down across from him with her coffee and a bagel she had no intention of eating. Emma Rodriguez is doing well, she said without preamble. He looked up from his newspaper. I'm glad to hear that. Marcus, you saved that girl's vision. Maybe her life. He folded the newspaper carefully. You're the one who ordered the biopsy, made the call to ophthalmology. Based on your diagnosis. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the early morning bustle of hospital workers grabbing coffee and breakfast before their shifts. I want to ask you something, Dr. Chen said finally. And I want you to really think about your answer. He nodded. What if I told you I wanted to create a new position here at Metropolitan General? A consulting role for complex diagnostic cases. Someone who could review difficult patients, offer fresh perspectives, help when the usual approaches aren't working. Marcus's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. What kind of position? Medical consultant for diagnostic services. You'd work with attending physicians, review cases, participate in multidisciplinary rounds. Not as a treating physician. You wouldn't write orders or have direct patient care responsibilities. But as an expert consultant. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You're more qualified than half my current staff, she continued. And you've already proved twice that you can save lives with your diagnostic skills. Dr. Chen, I don't have a license. This wouldn't require one. You'd be working under the supervision of licensed physicians, providing consultation and expertise. It's similar to how we use other specialists. Social workers, chaplains, therapists. They all contribute to patient care without practicing medicine directly. But why me? You could hire any number of board-certified physicians dash. Because, she interrupted, I watched you diagnose 2 rare conditions in 2 days that multiple specialists missed. Because you see patterns that the rest of us don't. And because? She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because sometimes the best diagnosticians are the ones who've been broken by medicine and rebuilt themselves. You know what it feels like to miss something important. That makes you more careful, more thorough than doctors who've never failed. Marcus stared at her across the small table. His eyes moved between her face and the bustling cafeteria around them. You know what people will say, he said quietly. A security guard with no license consulting on medical cases. Let me worry about the politics. The medical board could cause problems for you if they found out. The medical board cares about patient outcomes. If you're helping save lives, they'll figure out how to make it work. He was quiet for a long time, looking down at his hands. I've been invisible for 8 years, he said finally. Part of me likes it that way. No expectations, no pressure, no chance to fail someone again. And part of you misses saving lives, Dr. Chen replied. I can see it in your eyes when you talk about cases. He looked up at her. She saw something she hadn't seen before. Hope, mixed with fear and longing. If I said yes, he said slowly, what would that look like? We'd start small. A few hours a week, reviewing cases that have the attending physician stumped. You'd work with me initially, then gradually with other departments as people got comfortable with the arrangement. And if I make a mistake? If I miss something or suggest the wrong treatment? Then we learn from it, the same way we do with any other consultant. Medicine isn't about being perfect, Marcus. It's about being careful, thorough, and willing to admit when you don't know something. Marcus was quiet again, his coffee growing cold as he processed what she was offering. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. But don't think too long. There are patients upstairs who could use your help. 3 days later, Marcus knocked on Dr. Chen's office door. He wore a nervous expression and carried a manila folder. I've been thinking about your offer, he said. And? I did some research. Looked into the legal and regulatory requirements for medical consultants. Reviewed how other hospitals handle similar arrangements. He opened the folder and pulled out several pages of printed documents. There's precedent for this kind of position. Non-licensed medical consultants who work under physician supervision. The key is proper documentation and clear boundaries about what I can and can't do. Dr. Chen smiled. So that's a yes? That's a yes. With conditions. Name them. First, I want everything documented properly. Clear job description, defined scope of practice, proper oversight protocols. I won't put your career at risk for mine. Agreed. Second, I want to start working toward license restoration. It'll take time. Probably 2 years of appeals, competency evaluations, character references. But I want to do this right. I can help with that. Third, he said, his voice becoming more serious, I want to be honest with patients and families about my background. If I'm consulting on a case, they have a right to know who I am and why I'm involved. Dr. Chen nodded. Anything else? Just one more thing. I want to help train other people. Residents, nurses, support staff. To see the patterns that get missed. If I'm going to do this, I want to make sure the knowledge doesn't leave when I do. She stood up and extended her hand. Welcome back to medicine, Dr. Williams. He shook her hand. For the first time in 8 years, Marcus Williams felt like he was home. But what neither of them expected was how everyone else in the hospital would react to a security guard joining the medical staff. By the following Wednesday, news of Marcus's new role had traveled through Metropolitan General faster than a code blue announcement. The security guard from the night shift had been promoted to a medical consulting position. Nobody knew the full story. Just fragments and whispers that grew more elaborate with each retelling. Some said he was a retired doctor who'd been working undercover. Others claimed he had a photographic memory and had memorized every medical textbook ever written. A few people insisted he must have some kind of government background. Maybe military medicine or intelligence work. The gossip flowed through break rooms and nursing stations, in elevators and supply closets. Some staff members were curious. Others smiled and said, good for him. But not everyone was celebrating. In the physician's lounge, 2 attending doctors leaned close over their lunch trays. I'm just saying, Dr. Peterson from internal medicine whispered, I've been practicing for 20 years, board certified in 3 specialties. I've never been offered a consulting position. This guy was checking door locks last week. Dr. Rodriguez from cardiology shrugged. Maybe he knows something we don't. Oh please. It's Chin trying to look progressive, make some kind of statement about diversity in medicine. That same energy trickled into department meetings and medical staff communications. Quiet resentment mixed with confusion. The established hierarchy didn't have a place for security guards turned medical consultants. Marcus felt the shift the moment he walked into his new office on the 3rd floor. It was small. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and a computer he was still learning to navigate. But to him it represented something he'd thought was lost forever. Dr. Chen had arranged for him to shadow several departments during his first week. Observing rounds and case presentations. His first official consultation came on Thursday morning. A 67-year-old man with chest pain that didn't fit typical cardiac patterns. Dr. Peterson, the attending physician, introduced him to the medical team with barely concealed skepticism. This is Marcus Williams, our new diagnostic consultant, he said. The pause before diagnostic consultant was heavy with implication. Marcus nodded to the residents and medical students gathered around the patient's bed. Thank you for letting me observe. For the next 20 minutes, he listened as the team presented the case. EKG was normal, cardiac enzymes were negative. But the patient continued to complain of severe chest pain that worsened with movement. Any thoughts? Dr. Peterson asked. His tone suggested he expected Marcus to have nothing useful to contribute. Marcus looked at the patient's chart, then asked quietly, "Has anyone checked for herpes zoster?" The team looked puzzled. "Shingles," one of the residents asked. "He doesn't have a rash. Zoster can present with pain several days before the rash appears," Marcus explained. The distribution of his pain, right-sided, follows the T4 dermatome, worsens with light touch. It's classic for pre-eruptive zoster. Dr. Peterson frowned. "That's a pretty unusual presentation for dash. Let's examine him again," Marcus suggested gently. This time, they looked more carefully at the patient's skin. There, along his right ribcage, were the faintest traces of what would become the characteristic vesicular rash of shingles. "Well, I'll be damned," Dr. Peterson muttered. The patient was started on antiviral medication that afternoon. By the weekend, his pain was significantly improved. The classic shingles rash had fully developed, confirming the diagnosis. Word of the successful consultation spread quickly. Dr. Chen received calls from other department heads asking if Marcus could review some of their difficult cases. But success brought its own problems. Later that week, Marcus was called into a meeting with Dr. Eleanor Vaughn, the hospital's chief medical officer. She'd flown in from the corporate headquarters in Milwaukee. Her reputation for protecting institutional interests was legendary. Marcus walked into the conference room on the executive floor. Dr. Vaughn waited with a stack of personnel files and an expression that could freeze saline. "Have a seat, Mr. Williams," she said without looking up. Marcus sat. Dr. Vaughn tapped her pen twice against the table. "I've reviewed your background," she said finally. "You have no current medical license, no malpractice insurance, and no formal credentials to practice medicine in this institution." Marcus didn't flinch. "That's correct. You lost your medical license 8 years ago due to impaired practice." "I did." She leaned back in her chair. "Help me understand how someone with your history is now providing medical consultations at one of Chicago's premier hospitals." Marcus held her gaze steadily. "Because I'm good at diagnosis, and because Dr. Chen believes I can help patients." "You think this hospital should base medical decisions on belief rather than credentials?" "I think this hospital should base medical decisions on what's best for patients," Marcus replied calmly. "In the past week, I've helped diagnose hereditary angioedema, juvenile temporal arteritis, and pre-eruptive herpes zoster. 3 cases that other physicians had missed." Dr. Vaughn pursed her lips. "1 week doesn't establish a pattern of competence." "No, ma'am, it doesn't. But it suggests that my contributions have value." "And what happens when you make a mistake? When your lack of current training leads to a misdiagnosis or inappropriate recommendation?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "The same thing that happens when any consultant makes a mistake. The attending physician makes the final decision about patient care. I'm providing opinions, not orders." Dr. Vaughn stared at him for a long moment. "You're a liability, Mr. Williams. To this hospital, to Dr. Chen, and to the patients you think you're helping." "I understand your concerns," Marcus said quietly. "But I've spent 8 years learning from my mistakes. I'm more careful now than I ever was when I had a license." She stood and slowly closed his file. "This arrangement is highly irregular." "Yes, ma'am, it is. I'll be watching your every move." "I would expect nothing less." When the meeting ended, Marcus didn't return to his office immediately. He walked out of the hospital and sat on a bench in the small park across the street, staring up at the building where he now worked. For so many years, he had walked past hospitals like this one, wondering if he'd ever belong in medicine again. Now he was inside, but the fight was just beginning. He pulled out his phone and called his ex-wife Sarah. They spoke occasionally now, brief conversations about practical matters. But this felt different. "Marcus," she answered, surprised. "Is everything okay?" "I'm working in a hospital again," he said without preamble. Silence on the other end. "Not as a doctor," he clarified. "As a consultant. Diagnostic cases." "How do you feel about that?" she asked carefully. "Scared. Hopeful. Like maybe I can help people again." "That's what you always wanted," she said softly. "Even when we were kids, you wanted to fix things." They talked for a few more minutes. When he hung up, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The sense that he was moving forward instead of just surviving. The next morning, he returned to the hospital with renewed determination. Dr. Vaughn's skepticism didn't scare him. He'd faced worse obstacles than institutional politics. By the following week, 3 more departments had requested his consultation on difficult cases. A neurologist asked him to review a patient with unexplained seizures. An orthopedic surgeon wanted his opinion on a bone infection that wasn't responding to treatment. The pediatric team asked him to look at an infant with failure to thrive. In each case, Marcus approached the problem with the same methodical care he'd developed during his years in exile. He read every note, reviewed every test result, spent time observing the patients when possible. He asked questions that others hadn't thought to ask. The infant with failure to thrive turned out to have a rare metabolic disorder that required genetic testing to confirm. The patient with seizures had temporal lobe epilepsy triggered by an old head injury that had been inadequately documented. The bone infection was caused by an unusual organism that required specialized antibiotic treatment. Word spread beyond Metropolitan General. Other hospitals began calling, asking if Marcus could review cases via telemedicine. Medical students requested to shadow him during consultations. A pharmaceutical company invited him to speak at a conference about diagnostic reasoning. But Marcus was most proud of the teaching rounds he'd started with the residents and medical students. Every Thursday afternoon, he would present a case study focused on diagnostic pitfalls and pattern recognition. Medicine is like detective work, he would tell them. The answer is usually in the details that everyone else has overlooked. One young resident, Dr. Kim, asked him after a particularly challenging case, "How do you see things that experienced physicians miss?" Marcus smiled. Experience can be a blessing and a curse. Sometimes when you've seen thousands of cases, you start seeing what you expect to see instead of what's actually there. I spent 8 years outside medicine. That forced me to question everything I thought I knew. Another resident, Dr. Martinez, was more direct. "Do you ever regret losing your license?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I regret the circumstances that led to it. I regret that my grief affected my judgment and potentially harmed a patient. But the experience of losing everything and having to rebuild, it taught me things about medicine that I never learned in medical school." He looked around the conference room at the young faces watching him. "You'll all make mistakes in your careers," he continued. "The question isn't whether you'll fail. It's how you'll respond when you do. Will you learn from it? Will you become more careful, more humble? Or will you let it destroy your confidence?" 6 months after Marcus began his consulting role, Dr. Chen approached him with another opportunity. "The medical board has agreed to review your license restoration application," she said. She placed a thick folder on his desk. "I've written a letter of recommendation, and so have 12 other attending physicians." Marcus opened the folder and saw dozens of pages of documentation. Case reviews, patient outcomes, testimonials from colleagues who had worked with him. "This is incredible," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "You've earned it. But I want you to know, regardless of what the medical board decides, you have a place here. Your consulting role has become essential to our diagnostic services." The license restoration process took 18 months of hearings, competency evaluations, and character reviews. Marcus had to demonstrate current medical knowledge, undergo psychological evaluation, and present evidence of rehabilitation and professional growth. During the final hearing, Dr. Chen testified on his behalf. "Marcus Williams has helped solve more than 50 complex diagnostic cases at our hospital," she told the board. "His error rate is lower than our average attending physician. His contributions have directly improved patient outcomes. More importantly, he has shown remarkable personal growth and professional maturity." When the board voted to restore his license with conditions, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Probationary status for 2 years, required continuing education, and ongoing peer review. He'd been carrying that weight for nearly a decade. But the real victory came later that week. He was officially hired as an attending physician in Metropolitan General's new Department of Diagnostic Medicine. A department created specifically around his consulting model. At the hospital's annual medical conference, Marcus was invited to give the keynote address. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of physicians, nurses, and medical students, he felt the profound responsibility of representing not just his own journey, but the journey of everyone who had ever been written off or counted out. 8 years ago, I lost everything," he began. "My son, my marriage, my career, my identity as a physician. I thought my story in medicine was over." The auditorium was completely silent. "But this hospital taught me that second chances exist. That redemption is possible. That sometimes our greatest failures can become our greatest strengths. I learned more about medicine in 8 years as a security guard than I did in my first decade as a doctor." He paused, looking out at the faces watching him. "How many Marcus Williamses are working in your hospitals right now? How many brilliant minds are hidden behind uniforms and job titles that don't reflect their potential? How many second chances are you missing because you're not looking beyond someone's current circumstances?" The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. After his speech, a young woman approached him. A nurse who had been working toward medical school admission for years while supporting her family. I thought I was too old, that my background was too complicated, she said. But after hearing your story? Marcus smiled and pulled out his business card. Come see me next week. Let's talk about what's possible. As he watched her walk away with renewed hope in her step, Marcus realized that his journey had come full circle. He was no longer the broken doctor who had lost everything. Nor was he the invisible security guard watching life pass by. He was something new. A healer who understood both success and failure. A teacher who had learned that wisdom often comes disguised as defeat. The boy he had failed to save, his son Michael, would always be part of his story. But now that story had a different ending. One that honored Michael's memory by helping save other lives. By giving hope to other families. By proving that even the most devastating losses can eventually transform into unexpected gifts. Never assume someone's potential based on their current position or their past failures. Brilliance can be found wearing any uniform, carrying any history, at any stage of life. Sometimes the person checking doors or mopping floors has the knowledge to save lives and the wisdom that only comes from being broken and rebuilt. If you've ever been written off, counted out, or forced to start over, remember that your story isn't finished. The right person will recognize your worth, not despite your journey, but because of it. And when they do, be ready to prove that second chances can change not just your life, but the lives of everyone you touch. Sometimes the greatest doctors are the ones who have lost everything and found their way back to healing. Not just patients, but themselves.